The worry about the missing documents and the fine weighed heavily on my mind. I decided to retrace my steps and return to the spot where the officer had stopped me, hoping to find some clue or perhaps even the officer himself. As I arrived at the location, I noticed there were no signs of any police presence, which seemed odd given the incident had just happened a few hours ago. I pulled over and got out of the truck, looking around for any sign of my documents. A local passerby noticed my distress and approached me. I explained the situation, and to my surprise, he informed me that there hadn't been any police checks in that area for quite some time. Confused and increasingly anxious, I began to question the reality of the encounter. How could this be possible? I distinctly remembered the interaction, the officer's face, and the ticket he had handed me. Yet the more I thought about it, the more surreal it all seemed. Determined to solve the mystery, I decided to visit the nearest police station to report the incident and inquire about the officer. Upon arrival, I described the officer and the circumstances to the desk sergeant. After checking their records, they confirmed that no officers had been assigned to that area during the time of my encounter. My heart sank. The implications were chilling. Had I been the victim of a scam, or was there something more unexplainable at play? Feeling a mix of relief and unease, I returned to my truck. The documents were still missing, but the weight of the encounter lingered with me, leaving a profound sense of mystery and an unforgettable story to share. Arriving, I asked for the officer at reception and mentioned the fine. I gave an approximate location where I was stopped, and the officer immediately responded that no agent was assigned to that kilometer. Almost before I could finish speaking, another officer arrived, asking me for details of what had happened. Slightly away from the reception area, I provided them, and he asked me to wait a moment. He returned with a photograph and asked if that was the person I saw last night. I said yes, that he was the one who gave me the fine. I took it out of my pants pocket and it was completely blank. None of what he had written the night before was there. The officer, seeing my reaction, told me not to worry, that I shouldn't be scared, but that this officer was frequently mentioned in the area. He asked if I could accompany him to a place nearby, to which I agreed. We went in his patrol car and arrived at a spot on the road where there was a small mound of earth with a cross and several photographs of the officer I had seen the night before. I truly didn't know what was happening or what I had seen, but the officer seemed very calm as he showed me and told me that this was where that officer had died in an accident, and since then, it wasn't the first time he'd heard of people falling asleep at the wheel on that road encountering this spirit who stops them to prevent any kind of accident. Among all that mound of earth, flowers, and photographs, I found my documents. I took them and didn't travel that route again until I left that job. I expected to be truly afraid, but how could I fear something that protected me that night? The next story was shared with us anonymously. My story is short, but I would like to know if anyone knows about this or has heard of it. I remember when I was little. I estimate it was around the 1980s. I lived in a town very close to the highway that goes to Paris, Coahuila, and I heard adults telling stories about something they saw on that highway. They said that in that stretch, many drivers had the misfortune of encountering what they described as a bird, but not just any bird, a very large one. From what I recall, they said, and can now picture in my adult mind, it was about 2 meters tall. But they said it had a human face, as it would stand in front of cars and stare at them intently until, after a few moments, it would fly away. I never heard of any accidents there, missing people, or any encounters beyond just seeing it. The following story was also shared with us anonymously. I was driving through the mountains on a road towards Coahuila, Jalisco. I estimate it was around midnight. Everything seemed normal. I worked for a freight transport company, so I was used to driving at night on highways. However, it was my first time on this route. My companion had fallen asleep not long ago. He was in the passenger seat. Honestly, it didn't bother me at all. On the contrary, if I needed a break, he would be rested and could take over driving. While driving through the mountains, I saw what I believe were fireballs accompanied by silhouettes, barely visible in the light emitted by those floating balls. They were approaching the road we were on, and I didn't know what to do. I just kept driving. I didn't even wake my companion. In fact, it never crossed my mind. I just continued. As we passed by whatever that was, I turned up the radio volume. I didn't even look at them. Something told me not to. I only saw out of the corner of my eye how they glowed and how close they were as we passed. I didn't even glance in the rearview mirror once we were past them. I didn't want to see anything. After driving a bit more, we reached a small town. I woke my companion, and we stopped to use the bathroom and then went to a store that seemed to be open 24 hours. We asked the man there for a coffee, and while he served it, I took the opportunity to ask him about what I had seen a few kilometers back. Not surprised, he replied, almost smiling. You made it through? He gave us some bread and even charged us less for a double coffee so we wouldn't fall asleep. He advised us not to be on that part of the road at those hours, as it's common to hear about witches in the mountains and vehicles found empty, their passengers never located. This story I'm about to share, I truly don't know what to attribute it to. I feel it was something that followed me or that I brought with me from a somewhat small road. I live in Tijuana, Baja California. It was December, and that night I was going to pick up my son from a somewhat secluded part of the neighborhood where we live because the transport from his job only drops him off there. To get there, I had to go through a short road with very little lighting. When we returned, my mother, who was at home with us that night, scolded my children, asking angrily who had drawn that. On one of the windows of the back doors, there was what I could describe as I don't know. It was a face that evoked a lot of fear just by seeing it and remembering it. It was a skull, I think, but it had long hair and looked very upset. It wasn't drawn with dust. Rather, it seemed to form with the vapor inside the car, as if it had been drawn very clearly. We could never explain it, but now that I remember, that van. While I never had an accident while driving it, it did occasionally move on its own to one side when I was in it. Of course, I had it checked several times and they never found any fault or anything wrong with it. This face appeared every December for 3 years until I decided to sell it for the sake of my family. Has anything strange ever happened to you on the roads? So, feel free to share your story with us.